Oh man, what's up YouTube? Hope everybody's having an awesome afternoon. Behind the scenes disclosure, this is like attempt number 7 or something to get this video recorded. Every time I've started it, something's come up, whether it's been like somebody calling that I needed to answer, somebody knocking on the door, lawnmower outside, another call coming in, just have not been able to get this recording through. So you're seeing the fun side of not recording everything live. I'm trying to get into the habit with more videos of recording them as I play the league. That way it's just like one take, go through. The downside of that is, one, it makes videos like 2+ hours long, which I don't like. And then two, it really cuts back on the ability to like stop at important parts and really go through decision making because you have the MTGO clock to take into consideration. So with doing voiceover videos, it's a lot easier to keep the pace how you want it, stop where you want, let it play through where you don't. Really take time to go over important decision points, things like that. So, and again, the videos aren't like 2.5 hours long or something insane like that. So this one was a Dimir FrogTide league. We went over Dimir FrogTide a couple days ago, or whenever that video ended up airing, and played through a list without shadows. I know, hurt my soul as well. But I kind of wanted to do a follow-up to that video with a couple changes that I decided to make just to see how they'd play out. So, for example, in the main deck, cut the second copy of Cling to Dust and the 2 copies of Deep Analysis, plus something else. Oh, the Spell Pierce. No, kept the Spell Pierce. Something else. Cling to Dust, 2 Deep Analysis. Oh, a Consider. So I cut a Consider, a Cling to Dust, 2 Deep Analysis for 2 Go for the Throat and 2 Archmage's Charm. The Go for the Throat are mostly for energy and for the Murktide mirrors, giving you a clean answer to an opposing Murktide regent or like a Psychic Frog, something like that, as well as anything in the energy decks. The Archmage's Charms are because, one, I don't like Deep Analysis. I think that the card is really bad if you don't see the frog, and if you see the frog and you have Deep Analysis in hand, you basically have to just ditch it. Even if your opponent points like a fatal push at your frog, you just have to suck it up and ditch the Deep Analysis, because casting the 4 mana sorcery speed draw 2 is the worst feeling in the entire world. So I wanted to try Archmage's Charm, and I know a bunch of people are going to be in the comments like, oh, you should try Sauron's Ransom. Sauron's Ransom's been really good for me. I hate Sauron's Ransom. Let me do the side-by-side of Sauron's Ransom with Archmage's Charm. First off, none of our lands in our deck don't produce blue. So 3 mana versus 3 mana. Mana cost doesn't matter. Second, Archmage's Charm, draw 2 random cards off the top of your library. Sauron's Ransom, 98% of the exact same effect. So you get your 2 piles, your face down, your face up, whatever. If you take the face up pile, it's just like you drew the top 2 cards off your library. Just 2 random cards. It's just a matter of you happen to get to see them. But you can't change up what they are. If you take the face down pile, 2 random cards off the top of your library. The other one's going to the graveyard is cool, I guess, but you're a deck with so much cheap interaction that you don't really have a problem filling up your graveyard anyway. So either way, you're getting 2 random cards off the top of your library. There's that small little percent, you notice I said like 95%, because based on the face up cards, you can make tiny little probability adjustments for the face down cards. For example, if I cast a Sauron's Ransom and I flip over a face up Cling to Dust, and I don't want Cling to Dust, I know that if I take the face down pile, it can't have a Cling to Dust. So little tiny little nuances like that are possible, but I wouldn't bank on it. The ring bearer text doesn't matter in the slightest. I'm sure people make arguments for it, but most of your threats are so big that like being blocked by bigger things isn't really something you ever have to worry about. And then finally, the versatility of Archmage's Charm, being able to steal something or counter a spell, I think puts it leagues ahead of Sauron's Ransom in terms of having some usefulness in different matchups and different situations. Otherwise, rest of the main deck pretty much the same. 4 Bowmaster, 4 Frog, 4 Murktide, a Subtlety, 4 Counter Spell, 4 Fatal Push, bunch of 4s. 3 Spell Snare, Pierce, 2 Archmage's Charm, 2 Force Negation, Bloodchief's Thirst, a little extra interaction for especially the energy matchups. Now, you will notice some big differences in the sideboard. I really wanted to go overboard versus Tron and just see what happens. So, like, 4 Consign to Memory, 4 Break the Ice. Whether it's enough, whether it matters, I have no idea. But after the very demoralizing loss against Tron at the end of the last league, I decided, like, you know, if I run into Tron, I'm not going to lose to it. And then if I decide this is overkill on the Tron hate, I can always dial it back. But at least I got it there, even if I don't need it. Other than that, 2 Stern Scolding, a Mystical Dispute, 2 Toxic Deluge, and 2 Unlicensed Hearse. So, surprisingly balanced sideboard, even if you got 4 Consign and 4 Break the Ice that are basically just for Tron. I feel like the matchup in theory is that bad that it's kind of, you know, worth it. So, let's go ahead and jump into the matches. You can see how these changes actually performed. And here we go. Number 1, we are on the play. Spell Snare, Murktide. Go for an Undercity Sewers because, hey, I've got Spell Snares. They're not doing anything on turn 1. It looks like we are against actual factual OG Affinity, which is kind of funny. Definitely a deck I have not seen around in a while. Lava Spur Boots will force negation that so I can start like trying to double up counter spells because I really want to get this Murktide down as soon as possible. And now I have an opportunity to get down Murktide plus hold up Spell Snare, which means I can interact with an Arcbound Ravager or a Cranial Plating or a Patchwork Automaton, because, you know, those are pretty annoying cards to deal with. Bowmaster to shoot down a Signal Pest. If you haven't played against Signal Pest yet, and I wouldn't be too shocked because this is like an old Mox Opal card. It's a 1-mana 0/1 Pest with Battle Cry. So whenever it attacks, every other creature you have that's attacking gets +1/+0. And it's got a funny little line of text that says it can't be blocked by except by creatures with flying. So Murktide would be my only blocker if I so chose. Already getting to see Archmage's Charm standing out over Sauron's Ransom, being able to counter an Arcbound Ravager instead of looking for like a removal spell. Keep back an Orc just to block a Memnite. Like, I'm assuming my opponent's... Let's pause. I was assuming that my opponent wasn't going to try to jam in with everything since a removal spell just left them dead to Murktide. Turns out I was wrong. They did want to jam in with everything. So we'll just take our free chump block for the heck of it and Fatal Push a Blinkmoth on the way back. I do think it's funny. I joke all the time, especially on stream, about how I'm convinced that there's like an MTGO algorithm that makes determinations based off what you're playing and how it's going to pair you up. And in my mind, it's convinced that it's going to try to pay out the least possible to players by putting them against like horrible matchups based on their deck configuration. no evidence for this. I'm just convinced that it's there because of things like this, where I add Go for the Throat to my deck for the first time in, I don't know, 3 years. And the very first matchup is actual factual OG Affinity with Signal Pests and Arcbound Ravagers. Sideboarding, I ended up bringing in all my consigned memories because they look great here. And then I think I brought in like 2 Break the Ice because I didn't know if they were on Urza's Saga or if this was as OG Affinity as you could get. But we see an Yawgmoth Nexus on the other side, so Break the Ice, pretty good answer to that. They have Vault Scourge. Just trying to keep them off mana a little bit here while I develop what I've got going on. Break the Ice to take out an Yawgmoth. And now I feel like if I can untap and slam a Murktide, I'm probably in a pretty good spot. Like, here's a Murktide with Bowmaster or Consign. I will say that these Murktide lists, the hands that you find Murktide are exponentially better than the hands that you don't, which is a really big testament to Murktide itself. But unfortunately, if you're like me, you have a habit of not finding Murktide a lot of the times, so you have to adjust. Round 2, we got a tapped Overgrown Tomb, so could be some sort of Jund deck, could be the Rock, I don't really know. Spell Snare seems like a fine card to have in hand. And just jam a frog and like make them have interaction. If they have Fatal Push or something like that, like a big part of the reason I'm jamming the frog here is if they do have an answer for it, they're going to have that answer next turn and the turn after that and the turn after that, where I'm just going to be playing like a tapped land next turn or something like that. So I feel a lot better just jamming the frog here and saying, hey, you got to have the answer right now. And if you don't, I'm going to untap with Undercity Sewers and like Drown in the Lock or Spell Snare or something and be able to interact after this, plus have an active frog drawing me cards. Opponent finds a Bowmaster. We'll get that off the board, draw us a card. Continue on with our mana development a little bit. Okay, so now we know it's Yawgmoth, which I honestly did not guess based off previous information. Fly over with the frog, kind of make sure we get a card draw here, because I think the way I'm winning this game is drawing some more cards with frog, keeping up the counter magic so I can deal with stuff like Birthing Ritual or Yawgmoth if they find it. But now that I've kind of flushed with counter magic, I feel a little bit better just holding up mana, like letting them block. I could have ditched a couple cards to the frog. I think that would have been fine, but I can't really afford to. This is one of the points of frog that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough, is people seem to think that your graveyard is like this infinite resource. Like, oh, if they got a bunch of chump blockers on the ground, just keep flying over. It's like, well, you don't really have the graveyard to keep flying over, especially when you're playing things like Murktide and you actively want to see that card. And then letting the Hapatra resolve. I've got the Go for the Throat. I talk about it a lot with Shadow. I don't know if I talked about it much with Murktide, but counter magic, if you can choose to, really needs to be saved for 2-for-1s or things that accrue exponential amounts of value. In a situation like Hapatra, it doesn't actually do anything when it comes down. There's no combo element currently on board with it. So I can just spend my Go for the Throat on that, trade 1-for-1 with their 1-for-1, and save my counters for something like the Chthonian Nightmare that would accrue ridiculous amounts of value if I don't deal with it now. Start ditching some extra land, speed up our clock a bit. Now, I will say, like, I haven't been the biggest frog believer overall in my frog career, but frog did absolutely show out in this game. Drawing a bunch of extra cards, making sure we had more stuff to do than them at all points in the game. Preordained finding this Bowmaster means we have exactly lethal. We're able to Bowmaster ping them down to 8, grow our army to 2, so we currently have 6 coming through, ditch our 2 cards for 8 exactly. I don't think there's anything they can have with 2 green mana at instant speed. With 1 card in hand. Sideboarding against Yawg. Mostly bring out the non-creature counters. So things like Spell Pierce, Force of Negation. Bring in the Hearses. Bring in the Toxic Deluge. So turn 2 Innkeeper. We've got multiple spell snares. So we can go ahead and take that out. Keep them from developing their board more. I should have just played out the Flooded Strand here, just to keep from getting double spelled if there was a chance it happened. Like, thankfully it didn't really punish, but I think it would have been the safer play. Letting the Bowmaster resolve here because just having the body on board doesn't matter to me. I just need to keep them from having something more impactful. Then this is pretty good out of them. Thoughtseize away my Stern Scolding, get a Birthing Ritual down. So now I'm in a little bit of trouble if they're able to find something impactful. Delighted Halfling does mean if they have like a Grist, it's going to be problematic. I could have Blood Chiefs Thirsted the Halfling. And I probably should have. I probably just should have said, okay, the extra ping and point of damage off of the Bowmaster, like the ping and the extra dude is annoying, but it's not game ending. And I could have Stern Scolding that Yawgmoth had I done that. What we got? Double Wolf. Which means we can get rid of one of these wolves and just kind of hope that they're not willing to sack off their entire board. Because I do want this frog to connect and draw me a card. And yeah, it doesn't look like they want to sack off their other young wolf. So finding a Bowmaster's very, very key there. Don't want a Grist resolving. Another birthing ritual. So I'm pretty sure you can stack birthing rituals and like resolve one, go see what you find, and then like sack something and resolve the second one. Pretty sure that's how it works. They choose not to sack the Yawgmoth. So Drown and Lock, excellent pickup. And now again, we're just really hoping that the frog can kind of take over a little bit. Draw us a couple extra pieces of interaction, which looks like it's doing so far. Nope. Need my frog. Word of Calling, no way that's resolving, especially since it's their last card in hand. So now we know we can get in with the frog, with it flying. They could sack the Yawg and try to find something, but I really don't know what they would have that's more impactful than a Yawg, especially at the end of their turn. Like, you don't want to sack it for a Grist at the end of the turn. Fine, Murktide, so we'll cast that out so we can crew the Hearse, which forces the chump block with the Yawgmoth and lets us draw a card with the Frog. Opponent says, nope, I'm over it. On to match number 3. We're on the draw. Couple lands, couple Bowmasters. Looks like we're up against an energy build, but we've got the turn 1 Fatal Push. Since my opponent used Aether Hub and used their energy, I'm assuming they're constrained on red. Or they could have like a tapped land. But either way, I don't want them catching up on their mana by resolving or getting a hit through with that Ragavan. And looks like they found their red mana, so we're just going to be proactive and try to get threat down. Finding a land is great. Bowmaster's in a weird spot for me. Like, I don't think I underestimate the card since I've played with it a good bit. I just don't think that it's been as impactful in matches recently than I would have as impactful as I would have liked. Still okay. Not going to counterspell this Flage because I'd rather save the counterspell for the Flage on the way back. You know, the Flage that like stays around on the battlefield. Spell Snare pretty good into the energy deck. Really just looking for like a Murktide here. Especially if they're going to waste all their static prisons on Bowmaster tokens. And here is the aforementioned Flage that I'm more than happy to be able to counterspell. Been a Blood Chief's Thirst. I gotta go for the throats. I don't feel like I'm in a big need for counter or for removal spells. I really just need to find a threat. Especially before my opponent gets enough cards in their graveyard to get back to Flage again. Giganta in hand. Archmage's Charm, really good pickup. So, I will say here, let me pause real quick. I decided to hold up this Archmage's Charm. I would not fault anybody for just main phase drawing 2, especially when you have the Force Negation. Because if you do hit like a Murktide, then the game's probably just kind of over on the spot. Now, obviously, you could miss a Murktide, and then you lose out on Archmage's Charm. But I'm just saying, like, I would not fault you for making that decision. It just so happened to really work out for me that I didn't Archmage's Charm and draw 2, because being able to counter the Bowmaster and the Ob Nixilis there, really, really nice. Into Frog plus Charm. So now I do need to draw, because I've got to find an answer to this Giganta. Or not the Giganta, but the Flage. Unfortunately, they do have another Bowmaster. Kind of flood out a little bit here in the important part of the game. And then I could keep the Bowmaster, but really, I think if I don't find a Murktide, the game's kind of over. And even if I do find a Murktide, they can just attack in. I got a block, and then they Flage down my Murktide. So nothing really looks good there. Sideboarding. Again, kind of like Yawgmoth, taking out a bunch of the non-creature counters. Bringing in Deluge. Bringing in Unlicensed Hearse. Turn 1 Vexing Bauble. That is A-okay with me because the only card in my 75 that does not require mana is the one of Subtlety. So we'll take our chances with not drawing the Subtlety. They go to crack the bubbles. We'll go ahead and fire off the Bowmaster. Just get a little pressure on board. If they deal with the Bowmaster, cool. If they don't deal with the Bowmaster, cool. Looks like they didn't have a second land, so they scoop it up on to game 3. I would assume after that they took out the subtleties. But I guess they saw Force Negation game 1. But I'm definitely boarding those out against the aggressive creature matchup. Taking a note from Yawgmoth earlier, like counter the 2-for-1s if you can. Get down the frogs. If they do deal with it, we have backups. Okay. Let's talk about this. Opponent attacking him with the Guide of Souls into the frog, knowing that I can discard, to me is the biggest screaming, like, I have a flage that I've seen, and they want me to block, discard a card to deal with the guide, and then they flage, and I've got to discard like 3 more cards. Maybe they have a static prison, maybe they don't, but I don't want to give up that many cards just to keep my frog around. So I'm fine taking the 1, and if they follow up with the flage, then I'll discard 2 cards instead of having to discard like 4. Turns out they do in fact have the flage. So we'll ditch, grow our little hippie hoppy frog. And I can even get FrogTide down if I want, or just hearse away the flage. Also acceptable. Hoping that this Guide of Souls will be able to stay small and on the ground. But it doesn't look like they're going to be that nice to us. And unfortunately, with the extra energy, I will not be saving the frog this time around. Hop up an Orc army. So the only way blocking really punishes me, let's talk about this before we continue on. Your opponent does have to like target and pay the energy for Guide of Souls, and there's an opportunity to respond with removal before it resolves. They still have to pay the energy. So Bowmaster pinging down their army token would be an ideal outcome here. I keep thinking that the only way this really punishes me is if they have another Bowmaster and like a bolt or another galvanic discharge. Turns out they did have the second Bowmaster, so they get to keep their Orc army alive. Which means the only thing that, again, really punishes me here is them having a bolt or a galvanic discharge. And I don't feel like there's a big need to risk it, since I can just untap next turn with Counterspell and then block. So just take the damage, go to my next turn. I don't have good attacks, but at least I'm now protected from an attack plus a bolt or a discharge. Giganta to their hand. They decide not to attack, so I'm assuming they don't have the bolt or the discharge, or they just didn't want to use it. Deluge off the top of our library is a pretty excellent draw. So we'll attack in. Choose not to block. Cool. Here's a Deluge. Now we've got Counterspell if they decide to haste up a Giganta here. I can wait a little bit on Unlicensed Hearse, because if they did, I do want to point out that if my opponent did play a fetch here and cracked it, I would want to respond with eating 2 things. Or if they play a fetch, crack it, and get a Surveil land, and the Surveil trigger goes on the stack, I want to respond to that Surveil trigger with eating 2 things with Unlicensed Hearse. Because if they Surveil a Flage into the yard, I don't have an opportunity to respond. I don't have a priority opportunity to respond and exile the Flage. So I do want to crack as soon as I see there's a Surveil land. No Surveil land, then I don't really care. Hard casting Flage like this, I don't care because it's just putting me down to 1. If they have the Bolt, I've got the counter spell. And they're dead to any creature off the top of my library. But just going down to 1, fine. Static Prison. Decide to counterspell the Static Prison because if I don't find another creature or some way to interact with the Giganta in hand, I can just not attack with the Murktide. But I do find Go for the Throat, so now I can Go for the Throat, the Giganta, Unlicensed Hearse to exile 2 instants or sorceries out of my graveyard to grow the Murktide Regent. And then I'll have lethal on the next turn. I would have been dead to a Bowmaster there, but I can't really do anything about that, so be it. On to round number 4. Sitting at 3-0, pretty good league so far. On the draw, looks like possibly a Murktide Mirror. So we'll just hold up Spell Snare on turn 1 for a Psychic Frog. Ooh, opponent kept a 1-lander. Didn't find the second. We'll keep a Murktide on top. I've got some interaction going on in hand. I got Preordains to maybe find another land. So eventually I will want that Murktide. There's more lands. More than happy to play the draw go game here. Especially if opponent like this doesn't find lands and they're just having to go to discard to hand size. So now that they have found a land, I'll start kind of pushing the issue. Push is A-okay. So now there's 2 pushes gone. Try to spell snare my frog. We'll pierce your snare. Don't have another snare, so we know frog's going to resolve. Never mind. Force negation, pitching a frog. That's a bold one. I like it, but it's a bold one. Murktide Regent on their side, but we have Sink into Stupor, so you know, keep a counterspell on top, because why not? Spell Snare, counterspell, and now we're pretty ahead in the tempo department. If they decide to replay their Murktide, we can play a bigger Murktide. If they don't replay the Murktide, then we still have a bigger Murktide. Just a frog and what I would assume is like another counter spell. Alright, well that's a bunch of Go for the Throats. Looks really good in this matchup though. Instant speed, kill a frog, kill a Murktide, regardless of how big they are. Because I've got my 5 mana, I'm pretty good aggressively using that Spell Snare. Especially since it means they can't attack in with the frog. Like, for free. They can exile and hop the frog if they want, but there you go. Down goes frog. If we're being completely optimal there, I guess is the best word, then I should have gone to my turn, attacked in with the Murktide, made them exile with the frog, and then go for the throat. Because even if they have Force Negation plus a blue card, I can counterspell the Force Negation, and it eats up all of their yard as well as cards in the hand for the same result. But just in case they had something else to deal with Murktide, like the Black Flare. What's it called? Flare of Malice or whatever. If they had that as their last card, like Force Negation, Murktide, Flare of Malice, then by going to my turn, I would have been able to go for the throat, the frog. If they flare or attack first, they exile cards to bounce the frog. I go for the throat, they force, and then we eat the frog in combat. And if they want to like flare before damage, I can counterspell, and then it's just their Murktide versus my bigger Murktide. On the draw, I'm boarding out a couple copies of Psychic Frog because in like a fatal push matchup like this, I really don't want to play out Psychic Frog on turn 2 on the draw and have my opponent just like tempo swing me. Especially if they play out a frog on turn 2. I don't want to follow it up with my own frog. So I'd rather like make the fight revolve around Bowmasters and Murktides. Hearse is a pretty good top deck. I can't guarantee that this Hearse resolves, but I can at least play it out and see what happens. If it does resolve like this, then I know they're under very quick pressure to get Murktide down, and that plays better into go for the throat for me. Like, it looks like they have a Murktide here, play it out, probably have Counterspell backup. So me finding Spell Pierce right here means they have to have like Counterspell plus a Force Negation. Or Spell Snare plus Force or something like that. Spell Snare doubles or second Spell Snare. Either way, I feel pretty okay about going for the throat. I could go to my opponent's turn and try to have like go for the throat, Spell Pierce, Force, but then I run into the issue of maybe them having extra pieces of interaction, and I just don't really think that's worth it. So we got Subtlety on a Murktide, which I will throw to the bottom. I'm not under a lot of pressure right now, so not the worst deal in the world. Posing Unlicensed Hearse, so we know that this Murktide on our end is probably not coming down anytime soon. But I can always eat stuff in response to their Unlicensed Hearse just to help it out a little bit. Or help out my Hearse, stop their Hearse. Then, you know, if opponent is just going to give me the ability to play out a Murktide, I'm going to take it. Even if they have a counter spell for it. At least I made some of their Grave Hate kind of obsolete. Now, this I thought was funny. My opponent plays out a Psychic Frog and discards a Deep Analysis. I don't think they realized that there's this opportunity exchange or priority exchange here for me to unlicensed Hearse, because discarding puts a stack trigger for the frog. The Deep Analysis goes to the graveyard while the frog trigger's still on the stack. So you can't actually respond before they get priority back to cast the Deep Analysis. And again, that's like another reason why I'm just not a big Deep Analysis fan, is situations like that where it doesn't really do anything and you have to discard it. You just can't play a 4-mana sorcery speed draw 2. The Murktide attack here is because of the life total. My opponent's at 12. If I can get my Spell Pierce and my Spell Snare into the graveyard, then I can exile them with the Hearse and grow the Murktide enough to present lethal. Plus, I can exile some stuff out of their yard on their turn to keep the frog from flying. So I'm just going to tax my opponent's mana as much as I possibly can. Hopefully they don't find anything relevant. So we'll eat stuff out of their yard again, try to keep them from hopping the frog. And then as soon as I find a frog, it's just discard stuff, exile it with Hearse. If they want to respond and exile with their Hearse, great, doesn't matter. I'm still getting Murktide through for lethal. So on to round number 5, playing for the trophy against Watsy, Michael, M.A., probably Michael Majors. Got a pretty decent hand. A couple frogs. Got a force negation. See what we're up against. I don't know why the MTGO replay started lagging a lot during this match. So I apologize for it being a little bit slow. So we got a turn 1 Spy Master's Vault. I have zero idea what that indicates for me. Maybe like a mono black Necro list. I think that's probably my best guess. Either way, I'm going to get down a frog and hope to cover it. If they cast something to remove it on their turn, I can force negation. If they wait till my turn, I can counter spell. So hopefully we can get into a situation where they're going for like March of Wretched Sorrow, exile a couple cards, and I get to force negation, exile something, kind of stay ahead. Alright, we got an Amped Raptor into a Grist. Thankfully they can't cast that, but that means I have even less of an idea what I'm up against now. But I know Grist is a card that historically Blue-Black Shadow has struggled horribly with. So we'll see if we can find a way to deal with that. Preordained to find another land, attack in. If they want to block, I'll just discard a card, eat the Raptor. But now that we're on their end step, I really want to get this Bowmaster down because I can force negation like that, any interaction that they put up. Turns out they also have a Bowmaster. So when I say I am completely lost on what I'm playing against, I am like beyond uncertain. Now I wish I had had the 4th land on my turn to be able to like go for the 3rd and hold up counterspell. But since we didn't, I kind of just needed to fight over stuff on their turn. Unfortunately, they meant they could double spell. And one of those spells happened to be another copy of Galvanic Discharge, making my life pretty awkward. And now I can't draw off of this Cling to Dust without giving up my army token, which is my only line of defense at the moment. So instead, we'll just Cling to Dust the Nantuko, gain a little bit of life, get an enchantment out of the yard. I think that's... Oh, nope. We're waiting. Well, they are only down to 1 card. So as long as their 1 card isn't another frog answer, then I can, like, go for the Throat the Bowmaster or cling the Nantuko for the Nethergoyf or something. Grist. Well, at least I have to sack something. Dryad Arbor. Never mind. So, yeah, still no clue what they're up to, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that this is a pretty horrific matchup for us, with just everything being like cheap, interactive, 2-for-1s that create a bunch of value in the form of Grist, Amped Raptor being a 2-for-1, Nethergoyf being a good recurable threat, Galvanic Discharge, very efficient way of dealing with everything we've got going on. And then them not attacking last turn means I can't even like kill off a threat and kill the Grist. I needed to draw a Fatal Push there. Or a Murktide. Murktide would have been a phenomenal draw that turn. But like I mentioned previously, for whatever reason, I have a really difficult time with this deck of drawing Murktide when I need Murktide. Now, Murktide would not be a good draw here, since they can just Grist, sack off like an insect and kill it. But a Fatal Push would be good. A Bowmaster of our own would be good. Nope. Well, we're going to scoop it up here because now my best draws are like a threat, like Murktide, and they just have Grist to answer it in an uncounterable manner. So we'll just move along to game number 2. Sideboarding, wasn't really sure what to do. Boarded in Unlicensed Hearses and the Stern Scoldings. Boarded out Force Negations. I think I trimmed on a Frog because Galvanic Discharge, probably Fatal Push. Stuff like that. Answers. Pretty rough to play into. Galvanic Discharge, not so much, but Fatal Push is the really bad one. If I go turn 2 Frog into 1 open mana and they just go, Fatal Push, then I just like wasted a really big tempo swing. So Thoughtseize takes my Hearse, makes me believe that they probably have an answer to the Psychic Frog. Because based off what I saw game 1, I'm sure Hearse is annoying, but I can't imagine it being like a back-breaking card. Then play out the Frog, and they have Force of Despair, Ditch Thoughtseize. So, again, when I tell you this looks like a theoretically horrendous matchup, Thoughtseize into Force Ditch Thoughtseize into Renin 6, which I have no good answer for. Seems like not a great place for me to be. Now, as always, a consider into, like, find a land, consider into a Murktide could be a really good start. Drown and Lock into the Renin 6, not so much. What? Just 1 Murktide and we can change things around. Nope, not Subtlety. Said Murktide. Unfortunately, I think that our window is very much closing to get out of this. Decided to go for the draw 2 instead of the counter because I've got the Deluge to wipe away the Bowmasters. I just really need a big threat. And it's kind of, like I said, Murktide or bust. Got a Dolphy down, so at least we have the ability to like wipe the board with a Deluge. Or if we find that mythical Murktide, we can like push the Dolphy, play the Murktide or something, or just play the Murktide, hold up, drown. Unfortunately, Stern Scolding is not a Murktide Regent. Oh, Chthonian Nightmare. That's a pretty good one to have access to here, especially with the Bowmaster Dryad Arbor engine going on, and Renin 6 to get back the Dryad Arbor. That is what they would call disgusting in the biz. And I can very easily feel myself falling farther and farther behind. We're getting really close to the point where I don't even think a Murktide off the top would do it. But at least if they commit more to the board, I've got the Deluge to deal with it. I've got Drown to stop the Nightmare from coming back down. Hearse can answer this Renin 6 emblem at least a little bit. I'm just going to ping me instead of going for getting something back. Pretty smart. Now I need Hearse to get lands out of the yard so they can't Renin 6 take up with the Ren emblem. I needed to get instants and sorceries out of the yard so they can't top deck a land and retrace something. I needed to get creatures out of the yard so that they can't get them back with Nightmare. And I needed to leave stuff in the yard so if I find another Drown in the Loch, it's live. You figure out that one for me. I needed to exile literally everything while leaving stuff. On the bright side, at least I can respond to like Ren uptick or Nightmare target with exiling stuff. But just like this, I don't want to just throw away the Hearse uptick. Like I don't want to exile land and a Bowmaster and have them just Nightmare back another Bowmaster. So I have to let them get the land. In this case, retrace the Thoughtseize. Now, for my curiosity, what is the wording on Cling to Dust? Yeah, so the way Cling to Dust is worded, if it's a creature, you gain 3 life. Otherwise, you draw a card. Means that if you exile a Dryad Arbor, you just gain 3 life, even if it's a land. Because it's basically saying if the first condition is met, like you're exiling a creature, you gain 3 life. If that condition isn't met, then you get to draw a card. But with Dryad Arbor, because that first condition is met, you are exiling a creature. You don't get both. Just funny to think about. But with Unlicensed Hearse, I could maybe, I don't know, get up to a lethal Hearse. Or I got a lethal Hearse. Maybe I could find some interaction to actually get the attack through. But I'll go ahead and spoil the ending for you since I think Moto ends up getting really laggy and I end up kind of cutting it short anyway. I'd basically just Cling to Dust like 2 more times. I think I drew a couple lands and I just escaped Cling to Dust a couple times on some creatures to kind of stay alive and eventually just get overrun with Amped Raptor, Dryad Arbor, another Bowmaster, Ren pings, and not a whole lot we could do about it. So back to the idea that Moto's rigged and they throw a worst possible matchup at us. I still believe it. You don't have to. I believe it. But as far as the deck, pretty fun. Like, I know it doesn't have Bowmaster, or I know it doesn't have Shadow, which hurts a lot in the unfair matchups. The things like Ruby Storm against Eldrazi. Just not having Thoughtseize Shadow does a lot to slow your clock in those matchups. Subtlety's been very underwhelming for me. If the Dimir matchup is a lot more popular, then I think Subtlety's a bit better. But I also think you could just go up on something like Go for the Throat and kind of be in the same spot. While also not losing Subtlety in a blue card in other matchups where you just want cheap interaction. Force Negation, I think, is kind of on its way downhill. So in Shadow, I was really, really high on Force Negation towards the start of the meta because it was all like Ruby Storm and Chalice, Trinisphere, Eldrazi decks and stuff like that. And being able to Force Negation was game changing against all those. But now we're seeing more creature based Eldrazi and Boros Energy and Yawgmoth and Soul Trader stuff and things like that, where Force Negation is a really big liability in the main. So I might end up just moving one to the side or moving both or cutting them or something, but I probably don't want to run two in the main as much anymore. Archmage's Charm was very versatile. I do think there's a bit of a rise in Bowmaster decks, so do be careful against those. Like we saw 4 Bowmaster decks that league. We saw Yawgmoth, Mardu Energy, the Dimir Mirror, and Jund all had Bowmaster. So keep that in mind. I don't think Bowmaster's as good into Frog as people want it to be, but it's still like an annoying flash threat that you got to deal with. The sideboard, the 4 consign, 4 break dice. I still want to see Tron. I want to see how these cards work out against Tron. So that might stick around until I actually get some gameplay with it. Unlicensed Hearse was great. Deluge was great. Stern Scolding. Mystical Disputes, probably whatever. You could probably cut the Mystical Dispute if you're going up on like Go for the Throat. Otherwise, an idea I had the other day that I might want to run by you guys is, what about having I've done the matchup series before, where we talked about like sideboarding for different Shadow variants and different matchups, talked about play patterns and stuff like that. What would y'all think about a matchup series with actual test matches? Like, instead of just going through the theoreticals for like 30 minutes, go through and actually showcase game footage against that. That could be a pretty fun idea. The only problem is I feel like those videos would turn out being like 2 hours instead of just a 30-minute summary. I really like the idea of the matchup guide series because it's, hey, I'm on the way to a tournament. I'm riding down the road. I need to know about the Death Shadow versus Boros Energy matchup. Let me turn on the Cntrlfreak matchup guide series and just listen to 20, 30 minutes about breaking down lines and gameplay patterns, sideboarding options, stuff like that. So, I don't know. Still up in the air. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments. Otherwise, as always, have deck lists down below to the current iteration of the deck. Have linked to the Twitter in case you want to know when the stream's going live. The Twitch in case you want to come actually check out the live stream. And then the Discord if you want to come join the Cntrlfreak Discord. Talk about everything Shadow, non-Shadow, Dimir related, anything else. Or just come say hey and see what's going on. Otherwise, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company, and I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.